Iran stands defiant as US President Donald Trump brings back sanctions. Could Europe follow suit? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Iran and the West. Not so long ago, things were looking up for Iran. They signed a historic nuclear deal that lifted crippling sanctions and created a path to improve their economy. But now the US has brought those sanctions back, hitting Iran's oil, shipping and banking industries. Washington's measures are sure to hurt the country's already ailing economy. But at least Iran can still count on their friends in Europe, right? Well, perhaps not for long. Denmark has called for even tougher action against Tehran after it said it discovered an Iranian plot to kill an opposition activist. Iran says the allegations are baseless and that it's all part of an Israeli conspiracy. But the threat of further sanctions is real. At a meeting of EU leaders, several countries, including the UK and France, supported the Danish call to punish Iran. At the same time, those EU members also criticized Trump's decision to reimpose sanctions. So what is Europe going to do? Natalie Pohonen takes a look.
The Iranian regime has a choice. It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble.
The United States has reimposed all sanctions on Iran that were lifted under a nuclear deal signed during Barack Obama's tenure. The Trump administration says it has a clear purpose.
Our objective is to starve the Iranian regime of the revenue it uses to fund violent and destabilizing activities throughout the Middle East and indeed around the world.
They must stop ballistic missiles and abandon their nuclear ambitions if they seek a path to sanctions relief.
Since entering office, President Donald Trump has demanded as much. His Iranian counterpart, Hassan Rouhani, has been well aware his nation has been in Trump's crosshairs. Now he's returning serve with his own message for the US.
ما در شرایط جنگ اقتصادی هستیم. روبروی یک دشمن غدار ایستادیم. اون وقت صدام بود، امروز ترامپ. فرق نمیکنه. ما باید وایسیم، پیروز شیم.
In 2015, Iran and several world powers signed what's known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Under the deal, Tehran agreed its nuclear program would only be for peaceful purposes, and in return, sanctions that had crippled the economy were lifted. The EU, France, Germany and Britain issued a joint statement ahead of the US's latest sanctions, saying, "It is our aim to protect European economic operators engaged in legitimate business with Iran, in accordance with EU law and with UN Security Council Resolution 2231. It's an economic lifeline that could provide some relief to ordinary Iranians. They have borne the brunt of decades of sanctions placed on the government and officials. But Europe's relationship with Iran is complicated. The country has been accused of trying to carry out assassinations of Iranian dissidents on European soil. The Danish government says it prevented one attack in September. It's pointed the finger at Tehran and is calling for the EU to consider new sanctions.
Unfortunately, I also have to say that it doesn't seem to be an Iranian behaviour that is limited to Denmark. It's a concern that is shared by several European countries.
Iran denies the allegations and says it's part of a European conspiracy against the nation. The French government says Iran's Ministry of Intelligence was behind a plot to bomb this rally of Iranian opposition supporters in Paris in June. One of President Trump's lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, was at that rally. Iran denied any involvement. Tehran needs the support of Europe in the months ahead. But will the continent continue to be a willing ally? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining me now from Leeds is Alam Saleh. He's a lecturer in Middle East politics at Lancaster University. In Doha, we have Ali Fatullah Nejad. He's a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center. And completing our panel from Los Angeles is Roxana Ganji. She's an Iranian-American activist whose father served as education minister under the last Shah of Iran before the revolution of 1979. I'm going to get into the specifics of the Denmark case in a few moments. But first, I want to ask Alam, I want to ask you first about Trump reimposing sanctions and whether it complicates Iran's relationship with the Europeans. What do you think?
Well, first of all, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. President Trump on Monday put all its political pressure, economic pressure to destroy the Iran economy and also to force Tehran to renegotiate its nuclear deal. So they better win. Otherwise, that would immune Iran and somehow strengthen Iran's position in terms of its political and economic and security position at the moment in a very, very fragile Middle East. So this is particularly important since there are very few options open to United States apart from economic pressure to deal with Tehran or to force Tehran to renegotiate its security policies and of course, its nuclear ambitions. So this is what Europe and your European Union and other great powers such as China, Russia, plays a role at this very, very important historical moment is to keep this nuclear accord alive. And when this is particularly again important since United States has never been marginalized and isolated and has never been delegitimized in its security policies in the Middle East and particularly when it comes to Iran.
Okay, let me bring in Roxana Ganji. So Alam Saleh says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So by the US trying to penalize those who purchase Iranian oil, by penalizing some Iranian leadership and banks and ships and aircraft and so on, the US is not isolating Iran. The US is actually isolating itself, and there might be an opportunity for the Europeans and others. Do you see it that way, Roxana?
Unfortunately, for the past 40 years, what's been missing in this big equation is the people of Iran and the grassroots movements in Iran. That, you know, they've been over and over trying to show the world that they're against this regime. They've tried everything from the reform movement to moderates, hardliners, everything. Unfortunately, that's in this equation, the people of Iran have been totally looked over. And the Europeans, especially because of economic gains, have all over these years chosen to deal with a rogue regime, empower these ayatollahs in Iran to do whatever they want with their own people for the few dollars that the Europeans are making. I think it's time now, and I think President Trump's on the right track. The regime in Iran can't continue to treat the people in Iran like this.
Okay.
People over the past 40 years have had it.
Okay.
So I think that the Europeans only have to stand with the world.
Okay. So
okay,
this is interesting, right? And we're going to, and as I said, in a few minutes, we'll look at what the Europeans are trying to do with regards to a separate incident in Denmark. But staying on this topic for the moment, Ali, does Roxana make a good point that by the Europeans tripling their business ties with the Iranians over the past few years since the nuclear deal was signed, and I understand it goes from $7 billion or euros to over 21 billion euros, we haven't actually seen that money improve the lives of the Iranian people. It's just lining the pockets of the Iranian government. And so is Trump right? And are the Europeans wrong for being disappointed that Trump has reimposed those sanctions?
Well, to put it that way, what we've seen over the last few years since the conclusion of the Iran nuclear agreement has been a tendency of glorification by the Europeans vis-à-vis Tehran when it comes to its domestic politics, but also its regional policies. Whereas with the Bush administration, we've seen a return of demonizing Iran like we had during the Bush-Cheney era. So both readings are inadequate. When it comes to the business dealings that were struck after the deal, we see that over 80% went to semi-state and state entities in Iran, and there has been hardly a trickling down process onto normal Iranians. So that the economic growth figures that we've seen were against the backdrop of the revitalization of oil exports, and this economic growth has not been inclusive, so that average Iranians did hardly benefit.
Ali, I want to ask you about some of the US reasons for imposing the sanctions. Among other things, Tehran has to stop its missile program end support to Middle East terrorist groups. This I'm quoting the US State Department, including Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So is that, I mean, on a scale of 0 to 100, is that ever likely? Is that 0?
Well, it's probably not 0, but it's closer to 0 than to 100. So basically, what we have in the United States, in the White House, is not also a clear line. But at the end of the day, this maximum pressure strategy exerted upon Iran with the reimposition of comprehensive economic sanctions, crippling ones, has been designed, as it is said in the White House, to change Iran's mostly regional behavior. And it is quite unlikely that Iran going to succumb to those 12 demands put forward by the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But what is certain is that the economic problems in Iran will be exacerbated by this reimposition of sanctions, whose fallout has already been, felt in Iran during the last few months. So it's not actually breaking news, because we've already seen the consequences of the sanctions, with European companies retreating from the Iranian market. So in how far this will lead to Iranian behavioral change remains to be seen. But what the new situation in Iran is a growing discontent, by large sections of the society vis-à-vis the establishment, so that economic and political pressure will indeed be heightened.
Right. So, Roxana Ganji, you're saying that the Iranian people are left out of this equation. If by supporting President Trump, you're also supporting the sanctions, and therefore you're also supporting the tightening of the belts of the Iranian people, as Ali says, the economic problems are going to be exacerbated. So aren't the people going to be hurt by this?
Well, the people of Iran have been hurting for 40 years, and every year it's getting worse and worse. It doesn't matter which administration has been there. At one point in 2009, during the Green Movement, the people of Iran were on the streets chanting, "Obama, are you with them or with us?" They are tired of this situation. It's got nothing to do with the Trump sanction. It's got nothing to do with what Bush did. It's got nothing to do with what President Obama did. The people of Iran have had it with this regime. No matter what, at one point, and they've started their homegrown grassroots movements. So by supporting the people of Iran, they don't want this regime. It's very clear today that they have tried everything with this regime. They voted, they backed on Rouhani, they backed on Mousavi and Karoubi during the Green Movement. Nothing has changed the situation of the average Iranian on the streets. So I truly believe that the sanctions are hurting, but I think that people inside Iran are willing to take that.
Okay.
If it's not gonna be something, if we're not working towards another negotiation at the table with the Ayatollahs, which won't change anything. If it's gonna help them actually change this regime, have free elections, be monitored, internationally monitored elections, that's what they are rooting for.
Okay, so
and I think if anyone truthfully wants to hear that, they should go on the streets of Iran and talk.
Okay, so let me ask Alim Saleh, is that a fair representation of what might be the case, where some people are willing to take a necessary medicine if it meant changing their government and having more democracy, that they might be supporting the sanctions? What do you think, Alim?
Well, of course, the reimposition of sanctions on Iran, regardless of what we think about the regime in Tehran, is illegal according to international law, according to the United Nations Security Council. It's immoral because indiscriminately it's targeting ordinary people, average people. It makes their life much harder, and that's been said in the International Court of Justice. It's been said by so many human rights organizations and so on. Apart from this, it would never ever meet the objectives that United States claims that they are aiming to achieve, which is reforming or changing Iran's regional behavior and policies. In fact, it would strengthen the position of hardliners in Iran, and it would, of course, convince a large segment of Iranian societies that is Washington to be blamed and not Tehran's policy. So regardless of what Tehran does, the United States would be considered by probably some segments of the people that is hostile, and it's an enemy as Tehran has always been claiming it to be.
Okay, yep. So there is a theory that this would only embolden hardliners. It would put maybe more support behind the leadership. And in terms of the finances and economics, even though Iran is locked out of SWIFT and other financial institutions, it appears the Iranians have options with the Chinese, India, Turkey, and others. We'll have to see how this plays out. Now, there's another interesting thing that complicates the whole situation. And Ali, I'm going to address this to you first. We have the Danes saying that Iran tried to kill a dissident, right? So Swedish police arrested a Norwegian of Iranian descent. This was in Denmark. They say they were trying to take out a dissident. Now, the Europeans, ironically, even though they were against Trump when it comes to reimposing sanctions, they want tough action against Iran because they firmly believe that Iran's trying to take out dissidents on European soil. Ali, we have the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, saying this is a Zionist plot. Is that nonsense from him?
Well, the investigations on the background of the sad incident are still ongoing, so it's quite early to tell what the real motivations or the real backgrounds of this particular incident have been. And what we hear from the Iranian side is basically blaming the usual suspects. So it's actually too early to say anything more than that. But what is certain is that incident has actually signaled a crackdown within this before mentioned tendency of glorification in Europe vis-a-vis Iran. So there is this increasing criticism vis-a-vis Iranian actions, and this will be debated among the European Union. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be a game changer when it comes to the European Union's willingness to try to continue to engage in trade and rapprochement with Iran. So this won't be a game changer, but this will be a kind of temporary wake-up call. But this incident has been overshadowed by the Jamal Khashoggi murder. Otherwise, this incident would have been probably played a much more prominent role in Europe itself.
Okay, so Roxana, we have this happening in Scandinavia. In June, there was news in Paris, the accusations from multiple European countries that the Iranians tried to blow up an opposition protest rally. So the accusation is Iran wants to act above the law on European soil and murder dissidents. Would the Trump administration be right in thinking, you Europeans must be absolutely crazy, why won't you support our sanctions when the Iranians want to do this sort of thing on your soil?
Well, this issue is very close to my heart. I'm going to show you this poster, which is about 20 years old. This is just a number of people that were assassinated outside of Iran. It started with Tabatabai in Washington, D.C. Then we had the murders of Shahryar Shafiq and Ovaisis in Paris, Dr. Cyrus Elahi, which was a very close associate of my father, Dr. Reza Mazlouman, the same, Farrukhzad. We had the Mykonos, we had Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar in Paris. So this is not a new thing. There has been number of assassinations, a large number of assassinations outside of Iran. Well, it's been curbed because they were trying to sit at the table and they strike a deal which only benefits the Ayatollahs and their immediate family and the clique in Iran, not the people of Iran. So this assassination plot, if anybody's going to undermine what the Islamic Republic can do outside of Iran, you have to go and study the assassinations that have taken place. In Turkey, we had one of my father's close associates assassinated, Abbas Gholizadeh, who was found months later in the water. His remains were found later. So this has taken place all over the world by this government. And it's nothing new. So don't undermine it. I think, you know, the world has to finally realize the true nature of this regime, and that this regime will never change. It was based on the export of the revolution, and that's what they've been trying to do. And unfortunately, successful so far. They've done it in a lot of places.
So, Alim Saleh, as we circle back to the beginning and we tie the two issues here, again, what's in it for the Europeans is their relationship with the Iranians. If they're that convinced, right? We saw the Nordic countries come together and say we're convinced that the Iranians were behind this, even though they're still allowing this to go through due process. They seem to be as confident that the Iranians were behind this plot as, say, Turkey is that the Saudis murdered Jamal Khashoggi, at least until the Saudis actually admitted that they did, right? So what's in it for the Europeans? That they can be sure that this is happening, but they're still trying to kind of balance the relationships between not reimposing sanctions, still keeping business open. What's going on there?
Well, interestingly, it took Ankara at least 1 month, despite all the objective evidences, to officially blame and or actually condemn Saudi Arabia or Riyadh on Jamal Khashoggi's case. But interestingly, in this particular case, the Danish case, we see only hours before the alleged plot, we see that Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh condemned it and politicized it and securitized the issue for their own political ends. That doesn't necessarily mean Iran has never done this before. Of course they did, and they do, and they may do again. But as just Ali said, we really need to wait to see that how legal procedures would take place. This is particularly important since a few weeks ago, 2 other people have been arrested for the same reason in Denmark, but they have been released hours after their arrest and without any charge. So we really need to know whether what other mechanisms are playing role in this very important, well, but sad and however very politicized and securitized issue. This is particularly important since Mossad claims that they have played role in founding or unfolding this plot.
Mossad,
so for
Mossad
Europe,
claimed,
however,
hold on, sorry, Mossad claimed what? I don't understand.
Claimed that they have helped the Danish intelligence services to unfold or to uncover this plot. Right. But this is what Jerusalem Post has claimed. But for Europe, Iran is not only an economic issue; it's also a security issue. It's a political issue. The recent reimposition of sanctions on Iran and President Trump's walking away from the nuclear deal is humiliating Europe. It's more about a European dignity, political dignity, and independence to take this great opportunity to once and forever get rid of this Americans' hegemony and arrogant policies everywhere, internationally. So this is particular for Europe. Since Europe will be paying the price if Iran goes wild and goes against this, becomes more aggressive, not achieving its goals and the aftermath of the nuclear deal.
Okay, so we're going to keep a close eye
particularly since.
Okay, Ali, Alim, I have to move on, but we're going to keep a close eye on the sanctions. Okay. What sort of repercussions they have on the Iranian people and on the government. And we're also going to look at the relationship between the US and Iran, the Europeans and Iran. And we're going to wait for a verdict on the issue in Denmark as well. But for the moment, I have to move on. Alim Saleh, Ali Fathullah Nejad, and Roxana Ganji, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come, thousands of hopeful Sub-Saharan Africans on the cusp of Europe are being picked up and dumped in the desert. Why is Morocco's government clamping down? And we ask the head of the International Red Cross why millions of people are not getting the humanitarian assistance they so desperately need. For many migrants, getting to Europe is seen as the only hope for a better life. And one of the new major gateways is through a Spanish enclave in Morocco. The King, Mohammed VI, has been gladly receiving thousands from Sub-Saharan Africa into his country. But that warm welcome seems to have run out. Several human rights groups say that migrants are now facing arbitrary arrests, abuse and banishment. Morocco says it's simply fighting unauthorized migration. But after a multi-million-dollar aid package from the EU, some are asking if European pressure is dictating Morocco's migration policy. For more, here's Randolph Nogel.
On the outskirts of Tangier, these African migrants are living in hiding. Some have already been caught up in a government relocation program, which moves migrants from Morocco's northern coastal areas near the Spanish border to remote areas like Tiznit in the south.
They stopped me with my wife and my child. They detained us for the night. Then we spent 4 days there together. We slept on the ground, and they sent us back. I arrived in Tiznit, and I came back. This is my city.
Rights groups say the campaign to intercept migrants before they can try to cross into Spain is illegal and rife with abuse. The Moroccan Association of Human Rights, an NGO, has published videos of migrant camps left destroyed after raids and belongings that were set alight. Others appear to show migrants being forcibly relocated or detained at police stations, where the group says they're sometimes beaten. But Morocco's government says it helps migrants by providing them with options.
People who are intercepted, like in the north, we propose to them to go home safely. But if they want to stay here, all what we do is we help them to go to other cities. That's it.
One migrants' rights group says about 6,500 have been arrested or displaced since June, when the crackdown began. It was stepped up in July after at least 600 migrants successfully crossed to the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in northern Morocco. After Italy closed its ports to migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea, Morocco has become the leading gateway into Europe. More than 40,000 undocumented migrants have entered Spain so far this year. Morocco's king has been publicly welcoming migrants. But activists say many Moroccans are not.
Some people will even hold their nose. They don't even want you to sit beside them because they fear that maybe you got a bad odor or maybe you smell. Sometimes you don't even smell, but they just do it intentionally to tell you that you are not welcome. They don't even want to be close to you.
Morocco hosts 70,000 Sub-Saharan migrants. More than 50,000 got residency permits during several legalization campaigns in recent years. But some migrants say it makes no difference, and they're forcibly relocated anyway.
Migrants are in a situation that we would have never tolerated if it would have been toward animals.
The EU has agreed to provide Morocco with $275 million in aid for basic services and to create jobs in order to stem the flow of undocumented migrants into Europe. But some migrants say they can't find work or even shelter. And if they're caught here, they'll be moved south to face even tougher conditions. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, we're joined from the capital, Rabat, by Francois Koundounou. He's a journalist with Morocco World News. In Montreal, Canada, we have Mukhtar Lamani. He's the former ambassador of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the UN and an ambassador to many other places. And with me here in the studio is Tariq Sherkawi. He's the manager of TRT World's Research Center. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Let me start with the distinguished ambassador on our panel, Mukhtar Lamani. It's interesting, when we've spoken about the Arab Spring over the past few years, when we've spoken about the migrant crisis, it's not often that we talk about Morocco. But now we're seeing things unfold in such a way that in the year 2018, tens of thousands of people are trying to go through Morocco to Europe, and Morocco is stopping them. Is Morocco doing the right thing?
Well, I think the problem is much more complicated. It does not concern only Morocco, it's the whole North Africa and the whole continent, actually. What I can see that the options made, even since the independence of the continent, the options of development were bad. They have nothing to offer. All these people are very young people. And of course, it's not only Sub-Saharan who are trying to cross from Morocco to the north. They are joined by Moroccans. As well, the problem in Algeria is joined by Algerians and in Tunisia. So it's much more complicated. Unfortunately, all the solutions that they are trying to offer now are not really to the level of the challenges to find really a solution. The problem, you have to see the structure themselves. This is what I can say about this specific problem. And I expect things to become much more complicated in the coming years.
So Ambassador Lamani, what can they do better? What should they be doing rather than trying to save lives if people are drowning and sending them home if they're trying to get to Europe? What else should they be doing?
I don't know. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's the structure of development. I remember when I used to work in Tunisia in the 80s, there was a poll, and they were asking North African, giving them a lot of solutions, young people between 15 and 25. At that time, more than 60%, I just want to have a visa, a passport and visa, and to leave the country. So if people are not convinced, and they are right if they are not convinced because they have no future, they have nothing. I don't think that anyone would like to take the risk in the Mediterranean Sea where we have 50% to go to the other side or 50% to fail or to die. So what is done now, I think it should be a big conference, right, including Europeans as well as Africans at the highest level. Certainly. And to try to find some solution. But what the Europeans were offering recently, just to have some centers for immigrants to finance them in Morocco or in other countries, it's not the best solution. Right. Those are just very, very small solution, and they are not going to stop.
Yeah, and I want to bring in my other guests, but I just want to follow up very finally on this specific issue. When the Moroccans say, but these are not young Moroccans who are desperate. Some of them are, of course, but these are not young Moroccans. Yes. When you talk about the root causes, if it's somebody from Cameroon, it's not our problem. It's their business. We're just trying to keep our country stable. It's legal, but is it acceptable for the state to have that viewpoint?
Well, you have on the humanitarian side, which is very bad, but at the same time, if you take a group of these immigrants trying to cross the Atlantic, or those who failed in crossing or who succeeded, you will find different nationalities from Sub-Saharan as well as North African. Right. So this is why I said that the problem is much more complex. It's not only Sub-Saharan coming to Morocco trying to cross to the other side. Yes, this is part of it, but it's much more complicated.
Yes. Francois Kunduno, so Morocco says they foiled 54,000 attempts to cross through their country to Europe between January and the end of August. Of course, there have been many more since then, and we look forward to the stats that come through there. Is it a statistic that the country should be proud of, that they foiled this attempt, or should they have let them get to Europe?
Well, I think there is a need here for complexity and nuance. And I will join the ambassador in saying that the problem is much more complex and complicated than it seems. And it looks to me, at least it seems to me that we need here to reframe the question. The question is not whether Morocco should help them get to Europe or whether Morocco should foil their attempts to get there. The question is, how did they get to Morocco? How do they live in Morocco? And what Morocco is doing as a country trying to keep both its relationship with Africa, which is its institutional continent, and its relationship with Europe. Morocco, as, let's say, a rising African power, is facing a dilemma. It just came back to the African Union a year ago, and it's a very strategic ally with the European continent. So what Morocco is trying to do is keep both that strategic alliance with Europe, but also keep an African perspective on immigration. You put the question in a very simplistic way, as if Morocco is, these are migrants trying to get to Europe, let's stop them, let's prevent them from crossing the borders. No, the question is very much more complicated. As a journalist, working in Morocco, I've got the opportunity to speak to some migrants, know the conditions and the life situations they are living in. And it's something of complexity and nuance. And so what Morocco is trying to do now is both at the same time, they are building some camps. There are camps in Rabat, there are camps in Agadir, there are camps in Casablanca. And so they are trying to keep that continental balance in Africa. Like Morocco right now is leading African dialogues on migration. And they're also trying to keep the deal they have with Europe.
Right, okay.
Just
so
some months ago.
So Francois, before you go on, right? So let me take what you say. They're trying to play their part in Africa and play their part with their European partners. And Tariq Sharkawi, we have their European partners giving them tens of millions of dollars now to say do something, because Europe is at a place where we're not too happy right now with taking migrants. You have the Italians going quite extreme right now, saying get the hell out, don't come, right? Yes. So again, I go back to the very beginning, and even though Francois might find me asking this question very simplistically, let me ask it in as simple a way as possible to you, Tariq. Can Morocco do better, or is it doing enough right now?
I think it needs two to dance a tango. I think the problem is, yes, Morocco has a share of responsibility, but the EU has also a big share of responsibility, because there are mixed signals coming from the European Union. So on the one hand, you have forces within the European Union like Spain. They have a more tolerant policy vis-à-vis migrants, and you have the hardliners, some countries like Italy and like other forces in Central Europe who are pressuring the EU to take a harder stance. That hard stance actually was reached in the end of June, this June 2018, where everybody come on board with one decision, is to restrict the borders and tighten them more, and also put some more money to Morocco to police the borders, basically. And also the third solution was that they need to put centers in the whole of North Africa, not just Morocco, but the whole of North Africa and Niger. So these are some of the problems. There are mixed signals from the European Union. The Moroccan government and authorities have also their share of responsibility, because they did a very unexplained U-turn in the past 3 months. Before that, they were legalizing Sub-Saharan migrants, and they were opening the doors and following an open door policy. And suddenly, in the past 3 months, they started using very heavy-handed tactics and expelling people, forcibly expelling them.
So let me ask Francois. Francois, has it been heavy-handed? We've had reports from human rights groups. You're there on the ground, and I want to take the opportunity to use your insights on the ground. We had reports from human rights groups that there's been abuse and there's been excessive use of force in trying to evict people and expel them. Is that true?
There have been attempts to evict people from the northern side part of Morocco. Cities like Tangier, where people were trying to cross to Europe. Yes, it's been, at least from the reports from the human rights movements and human rights group, it's been harsh and a crackdown. But the government, at least that's one side. That's what I keep saying, that it's good to hear both sides, both narratives, to have a more nuanced view on what's happening on the ground. Because the Moroccan government, and I live that not only as a journalist, but also as a Sub-Saharan living in Morocco. There's been a policy of opening to Africa. I will make this point again. Like 1 year ago, Morocco came back to the African Union, and the king said that Morocco is African, and the future of Morocco belongs with Africa. So you have more African students, and Morocco right now, at least in North Africa, is the only country where people undocumented can live with no problem. Right. Now, what is happening on the ground is that the government pressured with people coming from Guinea, from Sub-Saharan Africa. They are trying to keep that safe net between Africa and Europe, because I keep saying it's a shared responsibility. It's not only neoliberal globalization that's failing, but we have to look at the political failures of African countries, for example. Where are they living? And we have to look at what Morocco is doing and the forces. So we have African forces, Moroccan forces, and European forces. The question is,
this is interesting.
Is Morocco doing right? But Morocco is doing what it can, but it's asking help from Europe and Africa to do better.
Okay, so you've opened open up something interesting here. Mukhtar Lamani, there's a big question about who is a preferential refugee or a migrant now, right? So we have the Balkan route has been stemmed in many ways, predominantly because of the Turkey-EU deal, right? So the focus, international focus, is not so much on that. We're back to the Mediterranean. We're looking at Libyans or people going from Libya to Europe, people going from Tunisia to Europe, people going from Morocco to Europe. The international consensus seems to be, if you're a Syrian refugee, yes, there's war in Syria, you take first preference because your country is currently burning, there's war. But if you're a Cameroonian, if you're from Guinea, if you're from Nigeria, there's no war in your country, you're an economic migrant, so you need to wait in line and you need to go back to your country because, I'm sorry, we can only help people whose countries are in a kind of hot war, who qualify as refugees. What do you make of that? Because that's at the heart of all of this now. For the Europeans saying it's not our problem because these are not refugees, they're economic migrants.
Well, this is the reality because of the international law. You know, there are conventions to protect refugees, and what happened in Turkey with the Syrian, I used to represent the UN in Syria as a special envoy there, and I saw very closely this kind of problem, which is totally different because the case of Africa is mainly economic. There are some refugees, of course, because there are wars also in Africa, but mainly economic war. But look, today, even in the United States, they have the midterm elections. And if you follow this and you see the major issue that the current President Trump is using to have the Republican succeed is what they call the caravana, this movement of economic immigrants coming from Latin America to America, how to stop them and how to send 15,000 from the army to stop them. This is a very serious problem. And I can give you even a personal example. You know, as a Moroccan, I left Morocco in 1979 to become international civil servant. And now when I go to see my family or I go through Morocco, there's no single red light if you are driving a car that you don't have 10, 20 young Sub-Saharan African begging there. And when they heard that, in their villages that some are in a better situation, they will continue coming. So this is why it needs really a very important conference at the highest level. Not only can be done through the UN about this kind of problem of immigration, and to be very innovative to the kind of solution to be that. If now, all what is done now, you know, Morocco recently, just at the pressure of Europeans, took a lot of Sub-Saharan from the north to some cities in the south. They will be back. They will be back. You know, it's those are not really good solutions. This is why we need another movement, an international movement from this kind of problem, because it concerns the whole world. People coming from the south trying to reach the north.
So, Tariq Sharkawi, if you stop the supply, or to try to stop the supply, you have to reform entire societies, essentially. That's the hard work, is that true?
Well, that's true. I mean, it's hard work, but it's necessary. I think Europe has to remediate to the difficulties that it's created in Africa and elsewhere. For example, you were mentioning the war in Syria. I mean, nobody tried to stop the war in the early phases, and they let it consume the whole country, and then we had millions of people leaving the country. I mean, if there was more proactive stances, if Europe actually go to the European Union, go to Africa and try to put projects, economic development over there, nobody would be thinking about joining Europe. So they have to face the consequences of their actions and the colonial times. Okay.
It's been a fascinating discussion. Now, we touched the surface and we opened up some very interesting things here, and we could go on for much longer. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I have to move on. But gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Tariq Sharkawi, Mukhtar Lamani, and Francois Kunduno. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
These people fled Hodeidah due to the war, and many of them escaped to this camp, where they have to continue to endure suffering. They have no flour, no rice or sugar. They have nothing here.
Leave no one behind. It was a pledge by governments and aid organizations just 3 years ago at a UN summit on sustainable developments. But a new report by the Red Cross thinks that promise is being ignored. This year, more than 130 million people around the world will have needed humanitarian assistance. Less than 100 million will get it. While many believe that's down to a lack of funding, the problem may be far more severe. So, what's the solution? Well, the Red Cross believes they may have the answer. So who better to ask than the head of the organization, Francesco Rocca. Francesco, good to have you on the Newsmakers once more. So before we look at solutions, help me understand the problem. Tell me why the system is broken according to the Red Cross.
But first of all, you have just recalled the numbers, and I think that sometimes numbers talk for themselves. But then look at the facts. Here is not a question of money, which of course are extremely important, but so we have other important factors that the governments and the donors are not taking in consideration, that we have radically to change the system. First of all, we have to understand that there are people out of reach in many places of the world. Think about the protracted crisis in the areas of conflict, because the conflict sometimes with the humanitarian organization do not have the physical access, which is something that is extremely important to reach. And this is something that must be remembered. The respect of the Geneva Convention, the respect of the humanitarian organization to reach those who at this moment it's very difficult to stay in contact with us. Then, for example, just this is another example in Congo, where we are responding and try to respond to the Ebola crisis. There are a lot of people living there which is completely scared by this terrible disease, of course, and even our teams sometimes are under attacks, so it's extremely difficult to reach those in needs. Third, and this is something that in this moment we are living in America, the migrants which are out of scope, apparent, but only apparently. This is people who is in need of humanitarian assistance, and we must need as humanitarian organization to take care of them. We cannot forget their needs and to take care of what they do need during their travel and their journey. And this is not interfering with the policies of the government. It's only about the human dignity and to take care of them. So there are a lot of factors. We can also recall another aspect, those who are out of seeing. So this is extremely difficult because sometimes they are like invisible. Think only about those who are living in the fast-growing urban slums. And this is another aspect on which the humanitarian organization in this moment have a lot of difficulty. So which is the answer? Sometimes is about the access of the humanitarian and the biggest humanitarian organization, but what we are trying to stress is the importance of the role of the local humanitarian actors. The local actors are extremely essential to deliver the aid.
Okay, so let me take one specific real-world example. You mentioned Congo. Let me look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. Many UN agencies have said that there's a humanitarian crisis in the Kasai region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? So you have government troops, you have armed militias. It's basically 2-on-2, two different groups against each other, or four groups, 2 versus 2, and civilians are suffering. Now, at the height of the conflict, in the heart and the heat of the moment, these guys don't respect the Geneva Conventions. They don't care about your 2018 World Disasters Report. How are you going to help those people who are suffering there? You're not going to go there with a gun as the Red Cross, right? So how are you actually going to get aid to those people without being political?
This is a reason more to stress the factor of the importance of the local actor. So sometimes the armed group at local level, they do not rely on the international organization. This is unfortunately is a matter of fact, but is something that is growing. If you look not only at Congo, but you look at the recent experiences that we are having in Nigeria, or like a master of all these experiences in Syria, this is something that unfortunately has happened. The importance of the local actors, the importance of those who are strictly connected to their communities and the trust that they are able to enable. And this is something that could be the right answer in the right moment. And this is a reason more to try to invest, because only a short percentage in 2017, the 2.9, if I remember correctly, but something like that, around 3% of the total funds of the humanitarian assistance went to the local actors. And this is something that we have to change. We have to radically change the attitude. We have to radically change the way we approach the crisis, and the protracted crisis especially.
So, in a nutshell, less top-down and more bottom-up, is that what it is?
Fantastic. Exactly. This is something that it's extremely important. The local actors, they do know their culture, they do know how the people love, the tradition, the religions. It's extremely important to empower and this is also, it helps to grow what is now, it's this new word that we are starting using, the resilience, the importance of the resilience. Investing in the local actors is the right answer in times of crisis, but even to prevent sometimes the consequences of the crisis. Think about the consequences of the climate change and other several factors. We have to invest in the local communities.
Okay, so you've got this big idea. You feel that the system is imperfect right now and it's fundamentally broken in many ways. You want to change it. Give me a timeline. Are you optimistic or pessimistic? And sort of, how many years are you giving it in order to try and implement this globally?
Look, as humanitarian, I must be, and I am optimistic. You cannot be a humanitarian without being optimistic, looking at the human nature. Then, as an outcome of the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in 2016, as you remember, the humanitarian community and the governments decided that 2030 is the deadline to move till the 80% of the humanitarian funds to the local actors. We think that we should speed up, because what we are experiencing on the ground is this phenomenon is growing, it's growing, and the lack of access is also growing. So this is something that we should work to implement the ability of the governments and to fund the local actors at all levels.
Francesco Rocca, always a pleasure talking to you on the Newsmakers. Thank you for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, how will the battle for the US Congress impact the Trump White House? We debate the results of the midterm elections. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.